tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Continuing on with Life of the Buddha. Chapter 2 is the early days of the Buddha's life, and there's not much given in the suttas, so I've tried to flesh it out a little bit, but for the time being going to not go too much into the commentaries and just focus more on the suttas. The Enlightenment itself is described in a number of discourses and from several different angles, as though one were to describe a tree from above, from below, and from various sides, or a journey by land, by water, and by air. There is the description of it as the attainment of the three true knowledges, told as following upon the development of meditation. Then there are descriptions of it in terms of the discovery of the structure of conditionality in the impermanent process of being, and in terms of the search for the undeceiving interpretation, the true scale of value in the problematic world of ideas, acts, and things, probabilities and certainties. Here is the description in terms of meditation leading up to the discovery of the Four Noble Truths. So remember, he was doing his austerities and then decided to eat food and start going alms round again, and then that's when the 5 ascetics left him. Now when I had eaten solid food and had regained strength, then, quite secluded from sensual desires, secluded from unwholesome states, I entered upon an abode in the first meditation, which is accompanied by thinking and exploring, with happiness and pleasure born of seclusion. But I allowed no such pleasant feeling as arose in me to gain power over my mind. With the stilling of thinking and exploring, I entered upon an abode in the second meditation, which has internal confidence and singleness of mind without thinking and exploring, with happiness and pleasure born of concentration. But I allowed no such pleasant feeling as arose in me to gain power over my mind. With the fading as well of happiness, I abode in onlooking equanimity, mindful and fully aware, still feeling pleasure with the body. I entered upon an abode in the third meditation, referring to which the noble ones announce, he has a pleasant abiding who looks on with equanimity and is mindful. But I allowed no such pleasant feeling as arose in me to gain power over my mind. With the abandoning of bodily pleasure and pain, and with the previous disappearance of mental joy and grief, I entered upon an abode in the fourth meditation, which has neither pain nor pleasure, and the purity of whose mindfulness is due to onlooking equanimity. But I allowed no such pleasure as arose in me to gain power over my mind. When my concentrated mind was thus purified, bright, unblemished, and rid of imperfection, when it had become malleable, wieldy, steady, and attained to imperturbability, I inclined my mind to the knowledge of recollection of past lives. I recollected my manifold past lives, that is to say, 1 birth, 2, 3, 4, 5 births, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 births, 100 births, 1,000 births, 100,000 births, many ages of world contraction, many ages of world expansion, many ages of world contraction and expansion. I was there so named, of such a race, with such an appearance, such food, such experience of pleasure and pain, such a life term, and passing away thence, I reappeared elsewhere, and there too I was so named, of such a race, with such an appearance, with such experience of pleasure and pain, such a life term. Passing away thence, I reappeared here. Thus, with details and particulars, I recollected my manifold past lives. This was the first true knowledge attained by me in the first watch of the night. Ignorance was banished, and true knowledge arose. Darkness was banished, and light arose, as happens in one who is diligent, ardent, and resolute. but I allowed no such pleasant feeling as arose in me to gain power over my mind. When my concentrated mind was thus purified, I inclined my mind to the knowledge of the passing away and reappearance of beings. With the divine eye, which is purified and surpasses the human, I saw beings passing away and reappearing, inferior and superior, fair and ugly, happy and unhappy in their destinations. I understood how beings pass on according to their actions. These worthy beings who were ill-conducted in body, speech, and mind, revilers of noble ones, wrong in their views, giving effect to wrong view in their actions, on the dissolution of the body after death, have reappeared in states of privation, in an unhappy destination, in perdition, even in hell. But these worthy beings, who were well conducted in body, speech, and mind, not revilers of noble ones, right in their views, giving effect to right view in their actions, on the dissolution of the body after death, have reappeared in a happy destination, even in a heavenly world. Thus, with the divine eye, which is purified and surpasses the human, I saw beings passing away and reappearing, inferior and superior, fair and ugly, happy and unhappy in their destinations. I understood how beings pass on according to their actions. This was the second true knowledge attained by me in the second watch of the night. Ignorance was banished and true knowledge arose. Darkness was banished and light arose, as happens in one who is diligent, ardent, and resolute. But I allowed no such pleasant feeling as arose in me to gain power over my mind. When my concentrated mind was thus purified, I inclined my mind to the knowledge of exhaustion of taints. I had direct knowledge as it actually is. This is suffering, that this is the origin of suffering, that this is the cessation of suffering, and that this is the way leading to the cessation of suffering. I had direct knowledge as it actually is, that these are taints, that this is the origin of the taints, this is the cessation of taints, this is the way leading to the cessation of taints. Knowing thus and seeing thus, my heart was liberated from the taint of sensual desire, from the taint of being, and from the taint of ignorance. When liberated, there came the knowledge, it is liberated. I had direct knowledge, birth is exhausted, the holy life has been lived out. What was to be done is done. There is no more of this to come. This was the third true knowledge attained by me in the third watch of the night. Ignorance was banished and true knowledge arose. Darkness was banished and light arose, as happens in one who is diligent, ardent, and self-controlled. But I allowed no such pleasant feeling as arose in me to gain power over my mind. Now here's the description in terms of the structure of conditionality, in other words, dependent arising. We shall return later to this subject. Before my enlightenment, while I was still only an unenlightened bodhisattva, I thought, this world has fallen into a slough, for it is born, ages, and dies. It passes away and reappears, and yet it knows no escape from this suffering. When will an escape from this suffering be described? I thought, what is there when aging and death come to be? What is their necessary condition? Then, with ordered attention, I came to understand. Birth is there when aging and death come to be. Birth is a necessary condition for them. I thought, what is there when birth comes to be? What is its necessary condition? Then, with ordered attention, I came to understand. Being is there when birth comes to be. Being is necessary condition for that. I thought, what is there when being comes to be? What is its necessary condition? Then, with ordered attention, I came to understand. Clinging is there when being comes to be. Clinging is a necessary condition for that. Craving is there when clinging comes to be. Feeling is there when craving comes to be. Contact is there when feeling comes to be. The sixfold base for contact is there when contact comes to be. I thought, what is there when the sixfold base comes to be? What is its necessary condition? Then with ordered attention I came to understand name and form is there when the sixfold base comes to be. Name and form is a necessary condition for that. I thought, what is there when name and form comes to be? What is its necessary condition? Then with ordered attention I came to understand consciousness is there when name and form comes to be. Consciousness is a necessary condition for that. I thought, what is there when consciousness comes to be? What is its necessary condition? Then with ordered attention I came to understand name and form is there when consciousness comes to be. Name and form is a necessary condition for that. I thought, this consciousness turns back upon itself. It does not extend beyond name and form. And this is how it happens, whether one is being born, aging, or dying, passing away, or reappearing. That is to say, it is with name and form as condition that consciousness comes to be. With consciousness as condition, name and form. With name and form as condition, the sixth sense contact comes to be. With the sixth sense contact, with the sixfold base of contact, then contact, with contact as condition, feeling as condition, craving, with craving as condition, clinging as condition, being, with being as condition, birth, with birth as condition, aging and death comes to be, and also sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and despair. That is how there is an origin to this whole aggregate mass of suffering. The origin, such was the insight, the knowledge, the understanding, the vision, the light that arose in me about things not heard before. I thought, what is not there when no aging and death comes to be? With the cessation of what is there the cessation of aging and death? Then with ordered attention I came to understand there is no birth, no aging and death comes to be. With the cessation of birth, there is the cessation of aging and death. When there is no being, no birth comes to be. When there is no clinging, no being comes to be. When there is no craving, no clinging comes to be. When there is no feeling, no craving comes to be. When there is no contact, no feeling comes to be. When there is no sixfold base, no contact comes to be. When there is no name and form, no sixfold base comes to be. When there is no consciousness, no name and form comes to be. I thought, what is not there when no consciousness comes to be? With cessation of what is there cessation of consciousness? Then with ordered attention I came to understand. When there is no name and form, no consciousness comes to be. With cessation of name and form there is cessation of consciousness. I thought, this is the path to enlightenment that I have now reached. That is to say, with cessation of all of these things, cessation of birth, aging, and death, sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and despair, that is how there is a cessation of this whole aggregate mass of suffering. The cessation, such was the insight, the knowledge, the understanding, the vision, the light that arose in me about things not heard before. Suppose a man wandering in a forest wilderness found an ancient path, an ancient trail traveled by men of old, and he followed it up, and by doing so he discovered an ancient city, an ancient royal capital where men of old had lived, with parks and groves and lakes, walled round and beautiful to see. So I too found that ancient path, the ancient trail, traveled by the fully enlightened ones of old. And what was that ancient path, that ancient trail? It was this noble eightfold path, that is to say, right view, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, right concentration. I followed that path. By doing so, I directly knew aging and death, their origin, their cessation, and the way leading to their cessation. I directly knew birth, its origin, its cessation, and the way leading to its cessation. I directly knew being, clinging, craving, feeling, contact, the sixfold base, name and form, consciousness. I directly knew formations, sankharas, their origin, their cessation, and the way leading to their cessation. I really like that teaching because it's tying together, using the Four Noble Truths as a framework for each step of dependent origination. And it really shows how it ties together, that dependent origination is very intertwined with the Four Noble Truths, and they reinforce and define each other. Now finally, here is the description in terms of the right judgment of the world of conditioned acts and ideas, classified in this discourse into the 5 aggregates, within which all conditioned experience, then when analyzed, can be classified. Before my enlightenment, while I was still only an unenlightened bodhisattva, I thought, in the case of material form, of feeling, pleasure, pain, neither pleasure nor pain, of perception, of formations of consciousness, what is the gratification, what is the danger, what is the escape? Then I thought, in the case of each, the bodily pleasure and mental joy that arise in dependence on these things, these 5 aggregates, are the gratification. The fact that these things are all impermanent, painful, and subject to change is the danger. The disciplining and abandoning of desire and lust for them is the escape. As long as I did not know by direct knowledge as it actually is, that such was the gratification, such the danger, and such the escape, in the case of these 5 aggregates affected by clinging, so long did I make no claim to have discovered the enlightenment that is supreme in the world with its deities, its maras, and its Brahma divinities, in this generation with its monks and Brahmins, with its princes and men. But as soon as I knew by direct knowledge as it actually is, that such is the gratification, such the danger, and such the escape, in the case of these 5 aggregates affected by clinging, then I claimed to have discovered the enlightenment that is supreme in the world with its deities, its maras, and its Brahma divinities, in this generation with its monks and Brahmins, with its princes and men. Being myself subject to birth, aging, ailment, death, sorrow, and defilement, seeing danger in what is subject to those things, and seeking the unborn, unaging, unailing, deathless, sorrowless, undefiled, supreme security from bondage, nibbana, I attained it. The knowledge and vision arose in me. My deliverance is unassailable. This is my last birth. There is now no renewal of being. Enlightenment has now been gained, and tradition has it that the first words that came to the Buddha, now no longer the Bodhisattva, were these. Seeking but not finding the house builder, I traveled through the round of countless births. How painful is birth ever and again. House builder, you have been seen. You shall not build the house again. Your rafters have been broken down. Your ridgepole is demolished too. My mind has now attained the unformed nibbana and reached the end of every kind of craving. These were the newly enlightened one's first words, though according to tradition they were not spoken aloud. The first words spoken aloud were those in the first of the 3 stanzas beginning, when things are fully manifest. This is in the beginning of the next chapter. Before I start chapter 3, then I'll read a little bit from Ajahn Achalo's book that came out, 3,000 Hours of Meditation. He describes the scene at the Bodhi tree a little bit and goes into his own reflections on it and descriptions of it. This is page 28. Bodh Gaya is at once wonderful and terrible, inspiring and unnerving, sacred and sad. On the way to and from the temple, we walk past crumpled old beggar ladies and kids crippled by polio. Looking down, we see nothing but rags, dirt, and misery. While looking up, we behold the temple's multi-tiered gold-plated spire shining brilliantly in the sun, and all around, skinny, dull-eyed children sell garlands of flowers that are intoxicatingly rich and exuberant in color. It is a place of contrasts and extremes. According to legend, it was intense from the beginning. Even after Lord Buddha had secured complete unassailable enlightenment, Mara, the king of delusion, rallied his forces with might never seen before. He wanted to obstruct the spreading of such a powerful accomplishment. However, the Lord Buddha's purity and compassion were so powerful that Mara's weapons turned to flowers as they entered the space surrounding him. Some consider this mythology an artful metaphor at best, but I do not. Mara, a sentient being like us, is understood to inhabit a higher heaven realm. His armies of Asuras and Yakas and various others are living in upper, lower, and parallel realms. They all share wrong views and harmful intentions. Although their weapons cannot be seen by the ordinary human eye, Lord Buddha could see them with his purified divine eye. Those weapons were launched by the dark powers of greed, hatred, and delusion that existed in the minds of Mara and his army. I believe the flowers were real too. They represent a fundamentally important fact. True goodness triumphs over evil, and the power of light transforms and eradicates darkness. The Buddha proved this in his own mind first by liberating himself from the causes of suffering, and then it was reflected outwardly in his encounter with Mara. It is a perplexing concept that an evil-minded being such as Mara can live in a high heaven realm. I believe it challenges people's perceptions of heaven and hell in a good way, and points directly at why we need to aim for something better and more dependable than a high rebirth. How does Mara get to live in a heaven? God doesn't decide these things. Karma does. Mara would have had to make enormous merits in the past. The fact that he has a vast and powerful mind, albeit a misguided one, suggests that he had also trained in the path of mental cultivation for quite some time. At some point, he must have made a drastic and terrible choice. He became fascinated with dark powers, that is, the powers of greed, hatred, and delusion. Because of his vast merit, he was given the job of CEO, the Chief Executive Officer of Kilesa Incorporated, in the Ministry of Defilements. Samsara is a true game of snakes and ladders. There are booby traps everywhere. You can be progressing very well for a time, then get swallowed by a deceptive serpent. In some suttas, it states that it is not uncommon for celestial beings to be reborn in hell. Once their merits are exhausted, then heavy old karmas can ripen. From the hells to the heavens, there is not 1 inch of the conditioned universe that is truly safe. It is, as Lord Buddha stated, the realm of death. We've got to get out of this place. The only escape hatch is the deathless. This is what the Buddha and Arhants have realized. I have come to see Mara as one of my teachers. Before you put the book down and walk away, hear me out. The Buddha teaches me what to do. Mara, on the other hand, teaches me what not to do. He must be respected in a way, because hating him would only bring him closer. The way to defeat Mara is through cultivating and maintaining mindfulness and wisdom. We need to recognize what is wholesome and unwholesome, skillful and unskillful, and make the best choices to the best of our ability. Then, slowly, his influence will wane. So Bodh Gaya is the place of enlightenment and the place of Mara's armies. It is ground zero, the physical epicenter of the battle that Lord Buddha won, and now it is up to us to follow in his steps. For students of life, there is a lot to be learned here. Having developed a committed long-term relationship with Bodh Gaya, I've learned to love it, mostly. Ever since I first heard about it, I was fascinated and felt magnetically drawn to it. Continue with Life of the Buddha. Chapter 3, After the Enlightenment. Thus I heard, on one occasion, when the Blessed One was newly enlightened, He was living at Uruvela by the banks of the river Naranjara, at the root of the Bodhi tree, the tree of enlightenment. Then the Blessed One sat at the root of the Bodhi tree for 7 days in one session, feeling the bliss of deliverance. At the end of the 7 days, he emerged from that concentration, and in the first watch of the night, his mind was occupied with dependent arising in forward order thus: that comes to be when there is this, that arises with the arising of this. That is to say, it is with ignorance as condition that formations come to be, with formations as condition, consciousness, with consciousness as condition, name and form, with name and form as condition, the sixfold base, with the sixfold base as condition, contact, with contact as condition, feeling, with feeling as condition, craving, with craving as condition, clinging, with clinging as condition, being, with being as condition, birth, with birth as condition, aging and death come to be, and also sorrow and lamentation, pain, grief, and despair. That is how there is an origin to this whole aggregate mass of suffering. Knowing the meaning of this, the Blessed One uttered this exclamation: when things are fully manifest to the ardent, meditating Brahman, his doubts all vanish, for he knows that each thing has to have its cause. In the second watch of the night, his mind was occupied with dependent rising in reverse order thus: that does not come to be when there is not this, that ceases with the cessation of this. Knowing the meaning of this, the Blessed One then uttered this exclamation: when things are fully manifest to the ardent, meditating Brahman, his doubts all end, for he perceives how the conditions come to end. In the third watch of the night, his mind was occupied with dependent arising in forward and reverse order thus: that comes to be when there is this, that arises with the arising of this. That does not come to be when there is not this, that ceases with the cessation of this. Knowing the meaning of this, the Blessed One then uttered this exclamation: when things are fully manifest to the ardent, meditating Brahman, there, like the sun who lights the sky, he stands repelling Mara's hosts. At the end of 7 days, after emerging from that concentration, the Blessed One surveyed the world with the eye of an enlightened one. As he did so, he saw beings burning with the many fires and consumed with the many fevers, born of lust, of hate, and of delusion. Knowing the meaning of this, he then uttered this exclamation: this world is anguished, being exposed to contact. Even what the world calls self is in fact ill. For no matter upon what it conceives, the fact is ever other than that. The world, whose being is to become other, is committed to being, is exposed to being, relishes only being. Yet what it relishes brings fear, and what it fears is pain. Now this holy life is lived to abandon suffering. Whatever monks or Brahmins have described liberation from being to come about through love of being, none, I say, are liberated from being. And whatever monks or Brahmins have described escape from being to come about through love of non-being, none, I say, have escaped from being or becoming. Through the essentials of existence, suffering is. With all clinging exhausted, suffering is no more. See this broad world, beings exposed to ignorance, relishing what is, never freed from being. Whatever the kinds of being in any way, anywhere, all are impermanent, pain-haunted, and subject to change. So a man who sees this as it is, abandons craving for being without relishing non-being. The remainderless fading, ceasing, the extinction comes with the utter ending of all craving. When a bhikkhu reaches nibbana, thus through not clinging, then he will have no renewal of being. Mara has been vanquished and the battle gained, since one such as he has outstripped all becoming. The occasion was this too, when at the end of 7 days the Blessed One rose from that concentration and went to the root of the Bodhi tree, went from the root of the Bodhi tree to the root of the Ajapala Nigroda, the goatherd's banyan tree. He sat at the root of the Ajapala Nigroda tree for 7 days in one session, feeling the bliss of deliverance. Then one of the Brahmin caste, of the haughty haw-hawing kind, went to the Blessed One and exchanged greetings with him. When this courteous formal talk was finished, he stood at one side and said, "What is a Brahmin, Master Gotama, and what are the things that make a Brahmin?" Knowing the meaning of this, the Blessed One then uttered this exclamation: "The Brahmin who is rid of evil things, not haughty, undefiled, and self-controlled, perfect in knowledge, and living the Brahma life, can rightly employ the word Brahmin, if he is proud of nothing in the world." Then there was an occasion, when at the end of 7 days, the Blessed One arose from that concentration and went to the root, from the root of the Ajapala Nigroda to the root of the Muchalinda tree. Now on that occasion, a great storm arose out of season, with 7 days of rain, cold winds, and gloom. Then Muchalinda, the royal Naga serpent, came out from his realm. He wrapped the Blessed One's body 7 times in his coils, and he stayed there with his great hood spread out above the Blessed One's head, thinking, "Let the Blessed One feel no cold or heat or touch of gadflies, gnats, wind, sun, and creeping things." At the end of the 7 days, Muchalinda saw the sky bright and cloudless. He unwrapped his coils from the Blessed One's body. Then he made his own form vanish, and assuming the form of a Brahmin youth, he stood before the Blessed One with his hands raised, palms together toward him in reverence. Knowing the meaning of this, the Blessed One then uttered this exclamation: "Seclusion is happiness for one contented, by whom Dhamma is learnt and who has seen, and friendliness toward the world is happiness for him who is forbearing with living beings. Disinterest in the world is happiness for him that has surmounted sense desires, but to be rid of the conceit, 'I am,' that is the greatest happiness of all." There was on an occasion when the Blessed One rose from that concentration and went from the root of the Muchalinda tree to the Rajayatana tree. He sat at the root of the Rajayatana tree for 7 days in one session, feeling the bliss of deliverance. Now on that occasion, 2 merchants, Tapusa and Baluka, were traveling by the road from Ukkala. A deity who had been a relative of theirs in a former life told them, "Good sirs, there is this Blessed One living at the root of the Rajayatana tree, newly enlightened. Go and do honor to him with an offering of rice cake and honey. That will be long for your welfare and happiness." So they took rice cake and honey to the Blessed One, and after paying homage to him, they stood at one side. Then they said, "Lord, let the Blessed One accept this rice cake and honey, so that it may be long for our welfare and happiness." The Blessed One thought, "Perfect ones do not accept in their hands. In what should I accept the rice cake and honey?" Then the 4 divine kings, aware in their minds of the thought in the Blessed One's mind, brought 4 jewel-like bowls from the 4 quarters. "Lord, let the Blessed One accept the rice cake and honey in these." And according to the commentaries, these 4 bowls fused and merged into one. The Blessed One accepted the rice cake and honey in a new jewel-like bowl, and having done so, he ate them. Then the merchants, Tapusa and Baluka, said, "We go for refuge to the Blessed One and to the Dhamma. Beginning from today, let the Blessed One count us as followers who have gone to him for refuge for as long as breath lasts. Since they were the first followers in the world, they took only 2 refuges." And so for today, I'll stop there. There was there's some fun commentarial things. There's 7 periods of 7 days, actually, and that only went through, I think, 4 in the life of the Buddha from the suttas, but also, so right after the Buddha's newly enlightened, he sits at the Bodhi tree for 7 days, but then he, according to the commentaries, he walks meditation for 7 days. Then he goes back to the Bodhi tree and does standing meditation facing the Bodhi tree for 7 days, and then these other 7-day periods arise where he's contemplating dependent origination, and he's at the Muchalinda tree, and then he goes to the Rajayatana tree, and that's where he meets Tapusa and Balika. And there's also a kind of a fun legend around them that the place where they were from, Ukala, was actually present-day Burma, and that the Buddha also gave them a bit of his hair, and that became Shwedagon Pagoda. Okay, so we have 10 minutes for questions, comments. Longpor, if you wanted to use the wireless mic also, if people had questions for you.
Ajahn Achalo's literal interpretation of the Buddha's enlightenment. Just curious if either of the Ajahns could. It's the first I've heard of any teacher espousing that.
It's faith type. Yeah.
Well, all right. From what I understood, what he said was that just he believed in the flowers coming down, as opposed to, I'm not sure what else was that there was some basis for there, and I think there's some miracles. I mean, it gets. Because, Ajahn Achalo is a certain temperament, but I don't think it's much of a stretch to, in terms of the Buddha. I mean, personally, I don't really care, but it's but yeah, I mean, there are some things that are quite miraculous that have happened. So that, in terms of even with in contemporary times, so that to think that nothing kind of special or miraculous never happened around the Buddha, I don't think. But it's of course Ajahn Chah never really invested much interest or attention in things like that. But then also, I think of what pops into my mind is the time when Lungpa Cha came after his operation on his brain. He left the hospital to go to stay at Kesari's house, and there was a tree in her garden that had not. I mean, it's something that bloomed. It bloomed annually. It was supposed to bloom annually, and then. And it hadn't bloomed for years. And then as soon as Ajahn Chah arrived, then it just came out in full blossom. And it wasn't even quite the season. So, there's, so that, some things are can happen out of the ordinary. Doesn't change the Four Noble Truths and dependent origination, but it's sometimes it's kind of fun, fascinating for some people
what I took from it too, because he was very clear, he wasn't interpreting it as a literal happening. He said it was happening like on the spiritual plane or in the mind of the Buddha. And he linked it together with greed, hatred, and delusion. And I took the reflection of like, even though Mara is this really high heavenly being, doesn't mean he's free of greed, hatred, and delusion. And I thought he tied it together well with like just the defilements, but that anything getting shot at him, it couldn't touch him at that point.
Yeah, I mean, it works really well on the imagery and the allegorical way. It really works well on that level, and in however one interprets it further is I think individuals will find it inspiring or worthy of doubt and skepticism.
Could you explain a little bit about the house builder metaphor?
Well, I think it's the that again, it's pointing directly to craving as that which constructs the edifice of being, becoming, of bhava. So that sort of tanha, upadana, becoming, and birth, and so that and the whole movement of desire, of clinging, of becoming that is what builds the construct of self and identity that we end up being born into. It's not really foisted upon us. We're happy to do it ourselves, and so we tend to. But it is that sense of we create an edifice that we end up being stuck in, bound to.
I'm wondering if you could speak about that in terms of like skillful means and practice. Like I remember Ajahn Jeff would say that it's necessary to build a skillful sense of self. How would that work in practice?
Well, I mean, you have to we tend, of course, we tend to extremes, so that both in terms of the constructing the sense of self, but then also investing in the annihilation of being, or annihilation of identity. Which both of those are extremes. So it's like understanding the process is neither building it up or tearing it down. It's just seeing it for what it is, and there is a reality of having I would say the benefits of having a positive, or at least a benign sense of being. I mean, that's one. So it's like when the Buddha is asked, what's the benefit of virtue? It's the benefit of virtue is non-remorse, because non-remorse remorse is what sort of it hangs around and sense of being ill at ease with one's place in the world. So then, creating a sense of one, say, at least on a neutral sense of non-remorse, but then also the constructing of punya and bharami. Those are creating, are creating the positive aspects of, say, being or identity, but without. And I think it's a fine kind of line that one is recognizing the causal process of how things work. We inherit the fruits of our actions of body, speech, and mind. But then we add an identity to it as an extra garnish that we get tangled up in, either on a positive side or on a negative side. So that coming back to the process, the house builder, it's like it's being built, and in the same way that one is building, like in the Dhammacakka Sutta, Cakukarani, Ñāṇikarani, we're building the eye of wisdom, we're building knowledge. Karna is to do, so that it's a verb, to do, to make, to create. So it needs to be attended to.